There is no one universally recognised best way of drinking whiskey. In terms of glassware, there's two different ways which are probably the most conventionally available and arguably the best. So you can get a tasting glass. So this is very much in the same vein as, say, most good wine glasses, for example. So you'll note that it narrows towards the top, and that helps to focus all of the various volatile compounds that come off the whiskey, and helps drive it up into the olfactory bulb, so i.e. in your nose, further up, which is where all the tasting happens fundamentally, alongside with the tongue. So that's great for that, but it's an aesthetic question as well, which is why sometimes people prefer a tumbler like this, which doesn't have that same effect of focusing things, but it looks a lot nicer, and you can get ice or water in there a bit more easily. But especially when you've got a beautiful glass like that, there's something to be said for it. In terms of what you actually do with the whiskey, so I mean, different people have different views. Generally speaking, the three different approaches you can take. You can drink it neat, which is to say you do absolutely nothing with it. You pour it just into the glass and have it as it naturally is. A lot of purists go down that route, but it's not necessarily always the best way. So we'll come to the other two alternatives. But it does give at least a true sense of what the spirit's all about straight off the bat. What you can then do is add water. Typically, though, you don't have to add an awful lot to get the effects of water. So what it manages to do, and I'll leave it to a chemist to give you a very detailed explanation, but basically it helps to break down the various bonds for all the chemicals in the whiskey, and it creates the ability for a lot of those compounds to then be better perceived, both in terms of smell and in terms of taste. So it can often take what can be very harsh, very dense, very concentrated flavours, and it just kind of can open it up a little bit. It only requires often just a couple of drops even to do that, so you don't have to be heavily diluting. Some people prefer to do that. If you've got especially something like a cask strength whiskey and you want to bring it down to a more manageable level of alcohol, but there's an argument that that rather defeats the point, because that's why you've got things like Eagle Rare 17 and Sazerac 18, is that it's already been cut and bottled at a sufficiently approachable level. So in terms of the third option is adding ice. It's personally something I tend not to do, but there are plenty of people who do choose to do so, and it's not a wrong choice. The reasoning why I'm generally avoidant of it is twofold. First of all, it's very difficult to control for the amount of dilution that happens, whereas at least with water, once you add it, it's done. Ice obviously is always melting, so it's going to depend on the temperature of the liquid, temperature of the room, what the surface area contact is, and all those sort of various considerations. So it's very hard to work out precisely how dilute it's going to be at what time. The second thinking is that generally when you chill things, it changes which compounds are sort of most active and most perceptible. Once again, chemists may correct me, so do feel free, but it generally is going to be limiting the scope of what you're going to be tasting and enjoying, in the same way that if you have a really cold American light beer, for example, tastes perfectly fine when it's well chilled, but actually then when you have it at room temperature and you can taste all the horrible flavours that you actually don't want to be tasting. So this is an inverse problem, basically. You want to have it, in my view, as close to room temperature as possible, but once again it entirely comes down to context, it comes down to situation, and it comes down to the whiskey as well. If you're drinking a Jack Daniel's, having it on ice is not really going to be a major game changer. If you're taking something like this, it's going to tone down and attenuate various flavours that have been specifically selected for by the distiller and the blender. So typically we'd be measuring this out if it was in the bar. Standard a 50 ml pour in this country, and if it's in the States you'd normally then do about 2 ounces, which is close to 60 ml.